We are the generation that was taught to rub some dirt on it and keep moving. We didn't have therapists, we had toolboxes. We spent 50 years punching the clock, believing our value was measured by the size of our paycheck or the sturdiness of the homes we built. But for Arthur, the real reckoning didn't happen in a boardroom or a bank. It happened in a cold, sawdust-scented garage with a piece of wood that represented every word he was too proud to say. Arthur's hands were a living map of the American dream. They were scarred by table saws, stained by 10W30 motor oil, and calloused by decades of honest labor. At 72, he was the silent king of his neighborhood. If your lawnmower was on the fritz, you didn't call a repairman, you wheeled it over to Arthur's driveway. If your porch steps were cattywampus, Arthur would show up with a level and a box of galvanized nails, refusing to take a dime for the work. He lived by a singular, holy commandment: measure twice, cut once. To Arthur, it wasn't just carpentry advice, it was a philosophy of life. It meant you don't speak unless you have something worth saying. It meant you don't commit to a person or a job unless you intend to stand by them until the finish. But as he looked at his daughter, Sarah, he felt like he had somehow messed up the measurements of their life together. Sarah was his only child, the light of his life, who had drifted into a world he didn't recognize. She moved to the city and became what Arthur called a suit. She spent her days in glass buildings talking about synergy and deliverables. To Arthur, it all sounded like gobbledygook. When Sarah announced she was pregnant, Arthur didn't buy a plastic, battery-operated crib from a big box store. He called those things Mickey Mouse junk built to fall apart the moment the warranty expired. Instead, he went to the local lumber yard and hand-picked the good stuff, black walnut. It was heavy, dark, and meant to last 100 years. "I'm building the kid a real sleeper," he told the guys at the hardware store, his chest swelling with a rare bit of pride. "Something that doesn't need a Wi-Fi connection to stay upright." The tragedy didn't start with a fight, it started with a shrug. During a Thanksgiving visit, Sarah walked into the garage and saw the half-finished cradle. The scent of fresh-cut walnut filled the air. "Dad," she said, checking the notification on her smartwatch. "It's beautiful, really. But we already bought a smart bassinet. It tracks the baby's breathing and plays white noise from an app. This walnut, it's just so heavy, and it doesn't really fit our aesthetic. Don't go overboard with this, okay?" Arthur felt a sting sharper than a splinter under a fingernail. To her, it was an outdated piece of furniture. To him, it was his John Hancock, his final mark on the world. He felt like a dinosaur watching the asteroid hit the Earth in slow motion. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just muttered, "Suit yourself," and threw a greasy, heavy canvas tarp over the unfinished wood. He checked out. He spent the next year sitting in his recliner, watching the evening news in the dark, feeling like a man whose best-by date had long since passed. He felt irrelevant. A year later, the Widowmaker heart attack came knocking. It didn't take him instantly, it just gave him his final notice. The doctors told him to stay in bed, but Arthur had one last measurement to check. That night, under a cold Ohio rain, Arthur limped to the garage. He was running on fumes, his heart fluttering like a trapped bird. He pulled the tarp off. The walnut was dull and covered in dust. As he picked up a piece of fine grit sandpaper, the psychology of his silence finally broke. He realized he hadn't been building the cradle for the baby, he'd been building it for his own ego. He had been hard-headed because he didn't know how to tell his daughter he was terrified of being forgotten. Every stroke of the sandpaper was an apology. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for the dance recitals because I was working overtime. I'm sorry I didn't know how to tell you I was proud of you without sounding like a drill sergeant." He sanded until his fingers bled, polishing the wood until it felt as soft as a prayer. When Sarah arrived 2 days later, after the neighbor found Arthur resting forever in his workbench chair, the garage was hauntingly still. The air was thick with the smell of cedar and wax, the incense of her father's religion. She pulled back the tarp. The cradle was finished. It glowed in the dim light like a sunset captured in wood. It was perfect. But as she ran her hand along the inner rail, she felt a small indentation. Arthur had carved a tiny, rough heart into the grain. Inside the heart, he didn't put his own name. He'd carved, "For the suit, love, Dad." Underneath, in his shaky, labored handwriting, he had taped a note, "Sarah, I know the world moves fast now. But when the batteries die and the apps stop working, I wanted you to have something that knows how to stand still. Don't let the bastards grind you down. Love, Dad." Sarah collapsed onto the oily concrete floor, clutching the side of the walnut cradle. The weight of it, the sheer, unyielding weight, was the physical manifestation of the love her father never knew how to put into words. She realized that while she had been busy climbing the ladder, her father had been building the ground for her to stand on. He died thinking he was scrap wood, a leftover from a bygone era. But in reality, he was the only smart thing she had ever truly owned. The tragedy of the American father is that they often speak in a language of service that we only learn to translate once the translator is gone. Sarah finally understood his measure twice philosophy, but it was too late to tell him that he had measured up perfectly.